What's happening, everybody? Dom here from Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals. Welcome back to the channel. So right here in front of me, I have the Nikon Z8, kind of like the little sibling to Nikon's full-sized flagship mirrorless body, the Z9. But the Z8 is going to give us basically everything from the Z9, just in a significantly smaller body. So very exciting news for those who just right off the bat know what that means, and I think is definitely worth talking about at least a little bit. So this week we're going to be giving just a first look at the Nikon Z8, but in case you weren't in the group of people who were in the know about the awesomeness of this camera, the Z9, there's really no way to do this Z8 thing without talking about its older sibling here, because they're really just so similar under the hood. Like, once we get past these body differences, you're going to be like, that's the same exact camera. I have shared plenty of my thoughts on the Z9 in a couple of past videos. I'll link to those in the end screen of this one, so you can check those out. So diving into the build and design of these cameras, let's actually start with the Z9 first. Just take a second there to notice its extended underneath part here that allows for a really robust gripping area in a portrait orientation with the accompanying hardware right here. It's going to allow for that big honking professional battery, give the camera some more real estate for some extra buttons and stuff. Just the standard stuff you get from a flagship size body. And so the main idea for the Z8 now was to ditch that extended flagship form factor body, keep all that stuff on the inside, and cut the size down to a much more standard sized body. So I've got to say, if you can't tell over video here, it's still got some pretty substantial bulk to it. It's definitely on the larger and heavier side of most pro mirrorless bodies right now. It kind of feels like handling a medium format camera, or a full frame camera of really comparable size would be like the Lumix S1 or S1H. Just got some heft to it. And interestingly, all that bulk and weight, and there's still no mechanical shutter curtain going on here in the Z8, just like on the Z9. As a matter of fact, I'll just mention this right now, I guess, but the whole sensor imaging scenario between both of these cameras is the exact same sensor, processor. Z8 has a 45.7 megapixel rear illuminated stacked CMOS X-Speed 7 processor, but we'll talk about performance a little bit more down the line. But anyways, there are going to be some sacrifices going from the full-size body to like a more standard body. For example, one of those is going to be the regular sized battery. The Z8 is going to take this normal ENEL form factor battery. In my short experience shooting on the Z8 so far, these batteries are powering it really excellently. That also leads me to my media situation, where the Z8 is going to have one CF Express Type B and one SD, compared to the Z9's dual CF Express Type B, except this is actually something I really like about the Z8. I love the inclusion of that SD card slot. It's just a type of media I'm much more likely to have around with me, and I kind of like the idea of designating what I'm shooting based off of what type of media. I'm not a big photo guy. If I was taking photo, it would probably be to the SD card. But this thing has some insane video modes, and the ones I would be interested in anyways can only be shot to a CF Express Type B. So if I was really using the Z8 in like a professional workflow scenario, I would love to be able to just visually designate which media was on each card like that. Love that for the Z8. So just taking a look at these inputs and outputs, this is actually another thing where we can kind of see how the intended users for each of these cameras were different. Z9, you're getting professional options for like networking and tethering out of this camera with the RJ45 port, though it only has one USB on the whole camera, this USB-C right here. Where the Z8, obviously it doesn't have all that space for all those fancy gadgets. We're getting a full-sized HDMI microphone and headphone, but also two USB-Cs right here, which is really clutch. Another small feature, but this is really helpful. This way the Z8 can dedicate one USB to supplementally charging the camera and have another totally free for accessories, networking, etc. So that's our first look at the outside of the Z8. Now moving on to the internal stuff, programming, performance, and all that. And not to sound like a broken record, but from here on out now, this thing is basically like a clone of the Z9. In case you weren't familiar with the awesomeness of the Z9, in terms of photo, that means 20 frames per second burst in RAW, 30 frames per second burst in JPEG. That's using the full frame area. Cropped in, you can achieve 60 frames per second, even 120 frames per second, cropped all the way down to an 11 megapixel size. Incredible. I guess another build thing that I forgot to mention, but while you're taking those super high bursts, you're looking through an ultra crisp and blackout free viewfinder. Just that combination right there of the high burst and this incredible viewfinder blew me away on the Z9, and the Z8 is no different. And actually, I said they were clones, but the Z8 is going to do one thing that the Z9 doesn't. The Z8 is going to be able to store photos in that sleek new HEIF image format. The consensus is the Z9 is going to get a bunch of stuff in a firmware update coming soon. But yeah, just my main takeaway on the photo side of things, borrowing that combo of the high burst through the blackout free EVF of the Z9, doing that on the Z8, but in a way less like cumbersome and more nimble setup, that just right off the bat seems like a truly unique experience that you're only going to get with a camera like the Z8. And I think a lot of that too has to do with the stabilization. Just real quick before we talk about video, I want to jam in a quick note here about how the IBIS on both of these cameras is extraordinary. Like, the IBIS blew me away shooting on the Z9, and I just had a feeling they really bulked up the IBIS because they could fit it in this body or something like that. I expected that to be like a peg or two down operating the Z8, but it is just as good as the Z9. I bet a photographer with really steady hands would be able to pop off a pretty low shutter speed shot just by hand holding this thing and letting the IBIS do the work. But I'm not that guy. For me, that IBIS is extremely appealing for, you guessed it, video. And again, if you know what the Z9 is doing for video, the Z8 is basically all of the same things, and that's just bonkers. So video recording mode, starting from the top down, and keep in mind, these are all internally recorded. And raw video capture, 8K up to 60p. That's Nikon's own raw profile. It's really rich in D range, has a lot of depth and color and room to play with in post. Behaves like true camera raw. I did a whole video on the Z9's raw workflow. Luckily for you, all of that is going to apply with the Z8. Check out that video, I'll link it on the end screen. For the less intense video modes, you also get a few ProRes raw modes, including 4K up to 60p, and even less intense stuff, MP4 and H.265 recording modes. These are going to be a lot friendlier on your PC. Yet they're still all offering up to 10-bit color sampling, and in a bunch of really heavy-hitting video modes like 8K 30p, 4K up to 120p. Unreal. And I've already gone on and on about how incredible that video looks from the Z9 in more than one of those videos, so I'll spare you that time now and just wrap it all up by saying, after the release of these two cameras, and I'm looking at Nikon in a completely new light. Like, I'm serious. Look at me. I love it. But there's got to be some sort of downfall coming from camera to camera here, right? I mean, there's got to be. Well, yes, but honestly, for a few things that I personally don't really care about that much, and I don't think a lot of other people will either. The Z8 is going to be limited in terms of some of those 4K and 8K recording times. Presumably, this is just because of the build. The Z9 is a lot better outfitted to dissipate the heat that's generated from those long 8K recording times. The Z9 was able to record 4K video in any recording mode for an unlimited time and could record 8K at 30p for approximately 2 hours, where according to Nikon, Z8 will record 4K at 60p for about 2 hours and 8K at 30p for about 90 minutes. And that's the only limitation in video. And for that to be the only limitation, I honestly think that's fine. I think it's a little bit of a lofty expectation to expect to record 8K video for longer than an hour or 4K video for like ever. I'm okay with those limitations. If anything, I probably like that those are there. So like, all in all, if you are comparing the Nikon Z8 to the Nikon Z9, which a lot of people are, in some ways you might find that the Z8 is just like a notch down in terms of professional capabilities. Just missing some of those extra bells and whistles that take like a flagship camera to that next level. So we aren't going to get a lot of those in the Z8, right? But to me, I honestly think that's kind of a benefit. All of those same bells and whistles that make the Z9 so desirable could be seen as a drawback in some way. You're not limited to CF Express only, pop an SD card in there. It's going to be way more nimble and flowy to shoot on this smaller body than this big heaping hunk of camera. And if you were in that spot of deciding which camera to buy, knowing that you really might not have needed all of those professional doohickeys and everything, if that was me, I would be absolutely thrilled that the Z8 came out. Here comes this camera with essentially all of those same features for less money, less body, and yeah, a little less cutting edge. And with that, that is going to do it on this first look at the Nikon Z8. Super awesome camera. I cannot wait to do more shooting with this thing. I'm definitely going to bring you, I think, like a vlog style, more fleshed out review after I've used the Z8 for a while. Toss some more sample footage and stills in there. It's going to be great. I'll link some of that Z9 content at the end screen once this video is done. And speaking of that, if you want to be notified whenever we post new content, you can hit that little bell that's underneath this video. And you may be like, Tom, I don't see that bell. Well, if you don't see that bell, that means that you're not subscribed. And if you're not subscribed, well, what? Yeah, go ahead and do that. And if you've done all that great stuff, you can also do the superfluous but also very much appreciated liking and commenting on this video. If you had any questions about the Z8 or the Z9, jump in the comment section below and we'll start a discussion. So a more extensive Z8 review coming at you down the way. So with that, people, happy shooting, and we'll see you in the next one.